Good morning. Wow, it's a lot of people here. It's such an honor to be on the stage and talking to you. I think so much of my life, I ask myself, how did I get to this moment in time? There's so many dreams that you don't even know you've had until they come true. And one of my biggest dreams was being able to share this work, the work that I do as a writer, not only with young people and adults, but with everyone doing their work to create a better community and a better world. I'm going to start by first thanking Laura for getting me here and then asking, and you won't get in trouble, I promise, but how many of you don't know me from a can of paint? Like, how many of you have never heard of me? Okay. So at least about half or two-thirds of the room, which is good. I mean, it's a good place to start. I like being unknown. One thing about being a writer is you're pretty introverted and you kind of love that anonymity, but you don't want to walk into a room and assume everybody in it knows who you are. So I'm Jacqueline Woodson. I've written 33 books, and I've written everything for, thanks. And I've written everything from picture books to young adult to adult novels. I write for the New York Times. I wrote last month's cover story on Lena Waithe, who did the show The Shy. It was the first cover story, where there was a Black queer woman on the cover of Vanity Fair. It wasn't me, it was Lena Waithe. Um, but I've known I wanted to be a writer since I was 7 years old. And if you have young people, they've probably read me because I'm on a lot of reading lists. Not the reading list of the stuff they don't want to read, I swear. But I've known I wanted to be a writer since I was 7 years old. And I grew up in Brooklyn and in South Carolina. And the section of Brooklyn I grew up in is called Bushwick. And my family was part of the Great Migration. So from the early 1900s to the mid to late 1970s, millions of African Americans, for those of you who don't know, and I'm sure a lot of you do, left the very, very awful conditions of the South, of Jim Crow South, for better opportunities for themselves and for their young people. And they went to places like Chicago, California, New York City, Philadelphia. And it was a huge act of resistance. And it was a huge search for home. Where do we go where we can thrive? Where do we go where our kids can be safe? Where do we go where we can be safe? Where do we go to get our basic needs met? And my mom brought us to New York City, and we landed in Bushwick. We eventually landed in Bushwick. But at the age of 7, I was saying that I wanted to be a writer. And I wanted to be a writer because, first of all, because I got in trouble for lying a lot. And the teacher said, instead of lying, you should write it down because then it's not a lie, it's fiction. But, but, but then because I love story. I love when people told me stories. I love making up stories. And I love the way literature could transport me to some place that I wanted to be, and or didn't even know I wanted to be until I got there. But my mom was a Black Southern woman, and and the idea of being an artist wasn't something that was realistic to her. Basically, what was realistic for her is me getting a job and getting out of her house. So, from a very young age, it didn't feel safe to her, the idea of a child aspiring to be an artist and not having a weekly paycheck. But my mom worked for Con Edison for most of my life, and she wasn't happy there. I mean, what made her happy is that she was able to feed her family as a single mom, that she was able to get her kids educated, that she was able to live somewhere for a pretty long time. But it wasn't the thing that brought her joy. And she really, really loved people and never was quite able to find that way of taking that love for people and applying it to her life and that care for people. But one thing she did was she passed it down to me, that sense that we all have a right to be here and we all have a right to be here safely. And with joy. So I'm going to start by reading um, from each kindness, and I'll tell you why after I read it. I wonder if I held this up. Can people see the pictures, or is it not even worth holding up? Yay? This and this. Okay. That summer, snow fell on everything, turning the world a brilliant white. One morning, the principal came in. She had a girl with her and said to us, "This is Maya." Maya looked down at the floor. I think I heard her whisper, "Hello." Her coat was open and the clothes beneath it looked old and ragged. Her shoes were spring shoes, not meant for the snow. A strap on one of them had broken. Our teacher, Miss Alpert, said, "Say good morning to the new student." But most of us were silent. The only empty seat was next to me, and that's where our teacher put Maya. And on that first day, Maya turned to me and smiled, but I didn't smile back. I moved my books, my chair, and myself a little bit further away from her. And every day after that, when Maya came in, she smiled at me, and I looked away and stared out at the snow. My best friends that year were Kendra and Sophie. Each morning we walked around the schoolyard, our fingers laced together, whispering secrets into each other's ears. One day, while we were near the slide, Maya came over to us. She held open her hand to show us the shiny jacks and tiny red balls she'd gotten for her birthday. "It's a high bouncer," she said, but none of us wanted to play. So Maya played a game against herself. That afternoon, when we got back into the classroom, Maya whispered to me, "I bet you can't guess who the new Jacks champion of the world is." Behind me, Andrew whispered, "Chloe's got a new friend. Chloe's got a new friend." "She's not my friend." The weeks passed. Every day we whispered about Maya, laughing at her clothes, her shoes, the strange food she brought for lunch. Some days Maya held out her hand to show us what she brought to school: a deck of cards, pickup sticks, a small tattered doll. Whenever she asked us to play, we said nope. The days grew warmer and warmer. The pond thawed. Grass began growing where snow had once been. One day Maya came to school wearing a pretty dress and fancy shoes, but the dress and the shoes looked like they belonged to someone else before Maya. "I have a new name for her," my friend Kendra said. "Never knew. Everything she has looks like it came from a secondhand store." We all laughed. Maya stood by the fence. She was holding a jump rope but did not come over to ask us if we wanted to play. After a while, she folded the rope double. She folded it double, rolled the ends around her hands, and started jumping. She jumped around the whole schoolyard without stopping. She didn't look up once, just jumped, jumped, jumped. The next morning, Maya's seat was empty. In class that morning, we were talking about kindness. Miss Albert had brought a big bowl into the classroom and filled it with water. We all gathered around her desk as she dropped a small stone into it. Tiny waves rippled out away from the stone. "This is what kindness does," Miss Albert said. "Each thing we do goes out like a ripple into the world." Then Miss Albert let us drop the stone in as we told her what kind things we had done. Joseph had held the door for his grandmother. Kendra helped change her baby brother's diaper. Even mean old Andrew had done something. "I carried teacher's books up the stairs," he said, and Miss Albert said it was true. I stood there holding Miss Albert's rock in my hand. "Even small things count," Miss Albert said gently. But I couldn't think of anything and passed the stone on. Maya didn't come to school the next day or the day after that. Each morning I walked into school slowly, hoping this would be the day Maya returned and she'd look at me and smile. I promised myself this would be the day I smiled back. "Each kindness," Miss Alpert said, "makes the whole world a little bit better." But Maya's seat remained empty, and one day Miss Alpert announced to the class that Maya wouldn't be coming back. Her family had to move away, Miss Alpert said. Then she told us to take out our notebooks, that it was time for spelling. That afternoon, I walked home alone. When I reached the pond, my throat filled with all the things I wished I would have said to Maya, each kindness I had never shown. I threw small stones into it over and over, watching the way the water rippled out and away, out and away. Like each kindness done and not done, like every girl somewhere holding a small gift out to someone and that someone turning away from it. I watched the water ripple as the sun set through the maples, and the chance of a kindness with Maya became more and more forever gone. So I was thinking about that ripple effect. I know y'all were waiting for the happy ending. I know you were waiting for me to turn the page saying, and then they lived happily ever after, because that's what's supposed to happen in children's books. It's a brand new day in the world of young people's literature. And that world is called realistic fiction. And one thing that literature does, first for the writer and then for the reader, is it shows us what empathy looks like. And it shows us what social justice looks like. And what does it mean to walk through the world treating someone in a certain way? And what does it mean to not be seen? And one thing that I learned when I went on a tour of one of the homes is how important it is that for the work that we're doing to engage people and change lives and let the people be seen, not as homeless people, but as people and people in need of homes. And I hadn't thought about that. I hadn't thought about how important it was for us to just have access to a bed at night, and how that was something I had taken for granted. And so then I started going back over my own life and looking at moments when it dawned on me that there was a struggle to home. And I'll get to that, but back to each kindness. So one thing as a writer, you have a certain responsibility. We talk about windows and mirrors, how it's important for a reader to come to a narrative and see a mirror of themselves, to see themselves somehow reflected in the book, so they could go, oh, my name's Chloe too, or, oh, I live in Bushwick, or, oh, I have a teacher named Miss Alpert, or, oh yeah, I think about kindness. And so they see places where they're like the protagonists, like the characters. And then it's important for them to have windows. And windows are experiences that they might not ever have had before, or things they may never have thought of. And those are windows into something different. So those windows and the mirrors allow young people to become more empathetic in the world. They see experiences of other people and they understand them. When I went on my tour, that was a window for me. That was showing me a world I had not given thought to, and until it was there, making so much sense. When I was writing each kindness, I thought about windows and mirrors. I thought about all the kids who would come to that book and they'd see themselves not in Chloe, the child that's being unkind, but in Maya, the child who's being treated unkindly. And I was very conscious of not wanting the children who saw, or the grown-ups who saw Maya as themselves, as someone, to see themselves as someone who is broken. And so when I created the character for Maya, every time she speaks, I make sure that she has agency. So when she says, she's asking the girls to play jacks with her, nobody wants to play. She has no competition. I bet you can't guess who the new jacks champion of the world is. So, and being very intentional as a writer to show that even if you're going to put a character on the page who is not being treated badly, that they don't need to be broken by it, because we don't get broken. We get treated badly all the time and it doesn't break us, and we hear again and again, what doesn't kill us makes us stronger. So when later on, when they're not playing jump rope with her, she rolls the rope, she takes the double Dutch rope, rolls it around her hands, and jumps around the whole schoolyard without stopping. She doesn't look up once, just jumps, jumps, jumps. And that's the last we see of Maya. But what we see is her walking off the stage, walking out of that book with agency, with a sense that I'm not going to go curl up in a corner and cry and hug my jump rope because no one will play with me, but I'm going to jump around this whole schoolyard, and you guys lose out because you don't have a jump rope. So, and I think a lot of times we look at literature for young people and think it's for young people, and it's not. I think of it as being for all people, because one thing, especially picture books, if anyone's ever thought of becoming a writer, one of the easiest ways to learn about the writing formula or format is looking at a picture book. In very few pages, very few words, you have a beginning, middle, and end. You have character development. You have conflict. You have all the things you need to create a narrative. But also, at different ages, we get different messages in a book. I remember the first time I read The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison, and I was in about the 6th grade. And for those of you who don't know, it's the story of Pecola Breedlove, who's a child who's being abused by her dad, and she wants blue eyes like Shirley Temple because she thinks if she has blue eyes, then she'll be loved in the world the way Shirley Temple is so beloved. And when I read that book as a 6th grader, my memory of it was that in the end, Pecola Breedlove got blue eyes, and she lived happily ever after. And then I went back and read it as an adult, and that's not the ending. And for a long time, I swore that Toni Morrison had written a young people's version of the book and an adult version of the book, and no one could tell me otherwise. But I realized that as young people, we compartmentalize, right? We take what we can understand and we put the rest somewhere for when we can understand it one day. And I think that growing up, coming out of South Carolina to New York City, I didn't know how much my mother struggled with housing. And I didn't know what it meant to be a single Black woman in the 60s, late 60s, early 70s, with 4 children and minimal employment, and to have to move around New York City trying to get a job. I mean, trying to find decent housing. And I'm going to read a couple of sections from Brown Girl Dreaming, which is a memoir of growing up. And I was born in Ohio, and then my mom and dad separated. My mom moved us all to Greenville, South Carolina, where my grandparents lived. And so we lived with my grandfather and my grandmother. And back in the day, adults were allowed to tell young people which one of them was their favorite. And we can't do that now. We have to say we love you all the same, and we know we're lying. We have that child we like just a little bit more than the other one. So, but back in the day, there was more transparency. And so my grandfather, who we call Daddy, because that's what my mother called him, would always say, "Well, Jackie, you're my favorite," in front of my siblings. Like, he gave no fucks. He did not care. But it was okay because everybody had a favorite. My mother and grandmother loved my brothers. My sister was my uncle's favorite. Like, everyone had a favorite, so we were all taken care of. But I adored my grandfather. And for the years we were in South Carolina with my grandparents, it was home. And for many years, once we moved to Brooklyn, until my mother's death, we referred to Greenville as going home. And so this is called Tobacco, and this is what's called foreshadowing. My grandfather died when I was about 7.5. Summer is over, a kiss of chill in the southern air. We see the dim orange of my grandfather's cigarette as he makes his way down the darkening road. Hear the evening greetings and the coughing that follows them. Not enough breath left now to sing, so I sing for him in my head where only I can hear. Where will the wedding supper be? Way down yonder in a hollow tree. The old people used to say a pinch of dirt in the mouth can tell tobacco's story. What crops are ready for picking? What needs to be left to grow? What soil is rich enough for planting and the patches of land that need a year of rest? I do not know yet how sometimes the earth makes a promise it can never keep. Tobacco fields lay fallow, crops picked clean. My grandfather coughs again, and the earth waits for what and who it will get in return. So, my grandparents were pretty well off um, until my grandfather passed away. And when my grandfather passed away, my grandmother moved to New York City with us. And we lived, um, by that time we were living in Bushwick. But before that, when we first came to New York City, we lived in Brownsville. And I hated it. So I'm going to read a couple of sections. And one thing about the Great Migration, people came to New York City and they talked about how fabulous it was, and how there were diamonds in the street and it was this promised land. And then people came here and they struggled and struggled and struggled. And so this is called Brooklyn, New York. We did not stay in the small apartment my mother found on Bristol Street, Brownsville, Brooklyn, USA. We did not stay because the dim bulb that hung from a chain swung back and forth when our upstairs neighbors walked across their floor, casting shadows that made my brother cry and suck hard on his middle fingers. We did not stay because the building was big and old, and when the bathroom ceiling fell into the bathtub, my mother said, "I'm not Henny Penny, and that is not the sky." So she called my Aunt Kay and her boyfriend Bernie. They borrowed a truck and helped us pack, bundled us up in winter coats, turned off that swinging light, and got us out of there. And this is Herzl Street. So we moved to Herzl Street, where Aunt Kay and Bernie lived upstairs, and Peaches from Greenville lived below us. And on Saturday nights, more people from Greenville came by, sitting and running their mouths, while the pots on the stove bubbled with collards and sizzled with chicken, and cornbread baked up brown inside Kay's black oven. And the people from Greenville bought more people from Spartanburg and Charleston, and all of them talked like our grandparents talked and ate what we ate. So they were red dirt and pine trees. They were fireflies and jelly jars and lemon chiffon ice cream cones. They were laughter on hot city nights, hot milk on cold city mornings, good food and good times, fancy dancing and soul music. They were family. Um, this is called Caroline, but we called her Aunt Kay, some memories. Aunt Kay at the top of the stairs, her arms open, her smile wide, and us running to her. Aunt Kay dressed up on a Friday night, smelling of perfume, her boyfriend Bernie, her friend Peaches. Aunt Kay in the kitchen with Peaches and Bernie, passing the blue and white box of Argo starch back and forth, the hard white chunks of it disappearing into their mouths like candy, the slow chew and swallow. Aunt Kay and Mama and Peaches in tight skirts singing in a band. Aunt Kay braiding my hair. Aunt Kay running up the stairs to her own apartment and me running behind her. Aunt Kay laughing. Aunt Kay hugging me. And then a fall. And then a crowd. And then an ambulance. And then my mother's tears. And then a funeral. And here, my memories of Aunt Kay end. So when we were living in Brownsville, my aunt fell down the stairs of our building and ended up dying. And she was about 28 years old. So this was a building that the landlord rented apartments to people who knew people, and there was all of this connection to Greenville and New York. But when my aunt died in that building, my mother didn't want to live there anymore. And so we moved, and somehow we found the second floor apartment in Bushwick that the 5 of us lived in, and then eventually it was the 6 of us with my grandmother. And it was a 2-bedroom, living room, tiny bathroom apartment in a 3-story wood frame building on Madison Street. And that's where I grew up. And it was a lot of people in a little bit of space. And my mother had her job at Con Edison, but now she's supporting all of us. And sometimes she didn't have the rent. And what was the scariest was the days when the landlord, Michael Insurello, and I'm giving you his name because there's a longer story to this, came by for the rent, and my mother would hide in the closet, and we'd say she wasn't home. And but as a young person, it was kind of a game, like, why is mommy getting in the closet? And as I grew up, I understood that it was out of this desperation. And so we hated this guy, Michael Inzarello, because he was the landlord. And we lived in a neighborhood that was on the edge of white flight, right? For those of you who know Brooklyn in the 70s, white folks were getting out of there. Black and Latino people were coming in. White folks were moving to Westchester and Long Island and Queens, um, and eventually it became a neighborhood of Black and Latino people. I say now the great grandchildren of those white flighters are moving back in, um, and they're called hipsters, right? So eventually my mother was able to also rent, when the people moved out downstairs, to rent the downstairs. So then we had, my grandmother started doing day work and had some more money coming in. So my grandmother had the downstairs apartment and my mother had the upstairs apartment. So it was kind of two separate houses, but not, four kids and my uncle. But then my uncle ended up going to prison. So it was just us. And then eventually my mother was able to buy the house. And my understanding of it was that she bought the house somewhere in the late 70s. And that's what I always thought. And then when my mom died in 2008, I inherited it. I inherited this house. And when I looked at the deed, I realized that Michael Insurello, this landlord who he disliked immensely and who, was chasing my mom down for the rent, had actually sold this house to my mom in increments. So he let her pay off a little bit at a time for 25 years. And so the house finally became hers in the late 80s, early 90s. I mean, he gave her the deed, but she was still paying on the house. And it wasn't that much money, but here's this guy who for so many years had been this evil guy who was not that at all, who had said, okay, you want to own this house, you can own this house, pay me as you can until it's paid off. So then my mother became old and got involved in some proprietary lending, and which I ended up having to pay off. But all that to say that so much centers around home, right? It's at the end of the day, what we want is just a place to live. And going to see the apartments, it dawned on me, something stopped me. Here's this room, this bed, this kitchen, a window, a bathroom, and this is all that someone wanted, that someone needed, was a place to rest their heads safely, to walk out of their apartment and have a community, to have a bench to sit on, to have a garden. All through my childhood, when we lived in that second floor apartment, my grandmother would sit at the window and look down into the garden of our backyard, which at that time we had no access to. And here was a woman who had come from the land, who all she wanted to do was get her hands back in the land. And it would break my heart that she didn't have that kind of access to the land. And then when they finally started renting the downstairs apartment, by then Michael, the landlord, had cemented over our backyard, and he did it because it was the easier thing to do. I'm sure it was water issues or whatever, but my grandmother and grandmother, because they were so damn country, they made my sister and brothers and I take shopping carts lined with garbage bags to the park across the street and fill them with dirt and bring them back to the backyard so they can make planters out of milk crates. And it was the most embarrassing thing for Bushwick kids could ever do. And we didn't understand it. It was that, they were migrants, right? They had migrated to this new world of New York City And we were the children of those migrants, and we were city people, right? So they were raising city children who are like, what fresh hell is this? And they were trying to keep their country ways, and they were trying to bring home to that spot in Bushwick. My grandmother planted a mimosa tree, which was the big trees, which was a tree of South Carolina. So for many, many years in our backyard, there was that mimosa tree, and that place was home to us. Um, so I am going to read another section from Brown Girl Dreaming, and then I'm going to read one other thing and talk to you a little bit more, and then I'll shut up and let y'all go on to do what you need to do. But I think the thing that I want to say is I am so, so grateful to all of you and the work you're doing, and the fact that you are seeing people as people and people who are in need of basic human rights, and our homes are our basic human right. I grew up Jehovah's Witness and Muslim, and I think when my uncle came back from prison, he had converted to the Nation of Islam, and I think because my family thought there wasn't enough religion in our house already, with us being witnesses, we practiced both religions. And what it allowed me to do as a young person was see both sides of a thing, coming from the North and the South, coming from Christianity and being a Muslim, and also coming from a family, coming from the not entitlement, the money that my grandparents had and my mom's own struggle, and seeing how fast things can change, how nothing is guaranteed, and getting back to each kindness, that idea that tomorrow I'm going to have this chance to do something different, and that chance might not come. This is called Music. So being a very religious child, there was a lot that was not allowed in my house. Well, as witnesses, we didn't celebrate any holidays, so now I celebrate every holiday. I'm looking forward to Eid. And I didn't celebrate my birthday, so now February is Jacqueline Woodson birthday month. You can hit me up on Twitter if you want to send a shout out. And making up for everything. My partner's Jewish, we celebrate Hanukkah and Christmas and Kwanzaa. So it just goes on in our house. And I let my kids listen to rappers like Kendrick Lamar, who curse, because I was never allowed to listen to. Each morning the radio comes on at 7 o'clock. Sometimes Michael Jackson is singing that ABC is as easy as 1, 2, 3. Or Sly and the Family Stone are thanking us for letting them be themselves. Sometimes it's slower music, the 5 stair steps telling us that things are going to get easier. Or the Hollies singing, he ain't heavy, he's my brother, so on we go. My mother lets us choose what music we want to listen to, as long as the word funk doesn't appear anywhere in the song. But the summer I am 10, funk is in every single song that comes on the cool black radio stations. So our mother makes us listen to the white ones. All afternoon, corny people sing about Colorado, about everything being beautiful, about how we've only just begun. My sister falls in love with the singers, but I sneak off to Maria's house. We're safe inside her room with a pink shag carpet and bunk beds. We can comb our doll's hair and sing along when the Ohio players say he's the funkiest worm in the world. We can dance the funky chicken, tell imaginary intruders to get the funk out of our faces. Say the word so hard and so loud and so many times, it becomes something different. Something so silly we laugh just thinking it. Funky, 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 we sing again and again, until the word is just a sound, not connected to anything, good or bad, right or wrong. I'm just checking the time. So when, as ambassador, oh, I forgot that part. This is the reveal. So one thing as ambassador, I wore the blue and white for a reason. You get a medal, and it's not given by the White House because in this date and time I would not have accepted it. Um, it's given by the Library of Congress, and the Library of Congress is now run by Dr. Carla Hayden, who is the first woman and the first Black woman to run the Library of Congress, which is the biggest library in the country. And and you basically, as ambassador, you get to choose your own platform, and you get to go, as Laura said, around the country and kind of preach the gospel of literature and the importance of reading and the importance of gathering together and having conversations. And my platform is reading equals hope times change, meaning we read, it gives us hope, or we read because we're looking for hope. And reading changes us. We're someone different when we open a book and when we close it. And my platform involve, and I get to choose the audiences. So I chose to go into juvenile detention centers, into into all prisons, into underserved communities where people have not had a chance to meet an author or have a conversation or write with an author, or talk about a book with an author. And so I've been going to places like Alabama and Mississippi. I was just in Alabama for the Equal Justice Initiative, the summit, and the opening of the Anti-Lynching Museum, and then went around and talked to juvenile detention centers in those areas. And again, I find that the work that we're trying to do to get people seen and to get people the basic needs, have their basic needs met, is not easy work. I have a friend who's a lawyer who's starting to write her first book, a law professor, and she texted me and she's like, "Writing's hard." And I'm like, "Hello." But it's not easy work. And it's work that without the right amount of self-care can take you out in so many ways. And I think it's so important that we all remember what the pilot says, right? Put on your own mask before helping others. Because we can get to that point where we're thinking so outside of ourselves that we don't take care of ourselves. And we've seen in the past couple of weeks what that looks like when we don't get our own mental health needs met. So do you take care of yourselves. This work is going to be here, and I know you'll keep doing it, and you're changing the world. Even days when it feels like you're not changing the world, you are changing the world for families. You're changing the world for young people. You're changing the world for people with mental health issues and people with drug issues. We all have a right to have a home, no matter where we're coming from or how we got here. So I just want to say, I deeply, deeply, deeply appreciate you. And I appreciate what Audre Lorde said, which is that our work is part of a continuum of work. And that work hopefully won't stop and can't stop until everyone, like so many of us in this room, can crawl into our own beds at night, turn on our own lights, or turn off our own lights, pull our own covers up to our chins, and sleep peacefully and safely in our own beds, and not have to dream about having a home. A home shouldn't be our biggest dream. A place to rest our head shouldn't be our biggest dream. Hopefully, we get this in place, and then we can work on those other dreams we have. So I just want to say thank you for your work. I want to end, I think I'm not going to read from Another Brooklyn because that might bring y'all down a little bit. But it's so funny because when I was a kid, my grandmother would always say, "Well, why don't you write one of those books with a happy ending?" And, I said, "Grandmama, it's up to you to make that ending happy. You can rewrite the narratives all you want." And I think that's one of the things we're doing in our work as people committed to social justice, is changing this narrative. So I am going to end by reading to you from Showe. And Showe is the story of my life. Wow, I don't know, it's so interesting how people could think people care about their own lives. So, but one thing you have to do as a writer is you start with what you know, and then you begin a conversation with the reader and the world, and the reader brings to it what they know and their own experiences. And again, we go back to the mirrors and windows of it. But I think that Showa is so important to me in remembering the history of this country and how it started on the backs of brown bodies, and how brown bodies were brought here as enslaved people, and we were not meant to survive, right? We were brought here to work until we died and to make more brown bodies who worked until they died, and we didn't die. We went on to become social justice workers and lawyers and writers and presidents and teachers and librarians. And we survived and keep surviving. And I think that's something that's so important in this time that we're living in. Know that we have survived people worse times than the present. And that it's been this work, it's been the grassroots work, it's been the work from the ground up. It's been the work of small organizations and getting together and organizing local politicians and calling people out and having these hard conversations that creates the change that has been created and will continue to create the change. And it's, giving money, man. It's the tithing. It's the donating to the organizations that we believe in. And we know are doing the work. So homage to the ancestors who are in the room with us and being proud of us for doing this work. And homage to my grandma and my mom, who, if not for them, I wouldn't be standing here. And I know y'all all have shoulders that you're standing on right now. So just take a moment to think of those people and thank them. And homage to my daughter, who inspired this book. My grandmother died. When I was a kid, my grandmother would constantly ask me, when are you going to have that baby? When are you going to have some baby? Give me some great grandkids, which I thought was greedy, right? Because she had grandkids. But she said, when are you going to get married? I'm like, I'm not getting married, but I will have some kids. She's like, no hurry. You don't have to hurry. But then when she was finally, and my family would never talk about our history because they were afraid I was going to go tell people, which obviously I did. But then when she was close to death, she started giving me the names of all her siblings, and it was kind of like, I'm ready. If you wanna, if you and your partner want to have kids, like whatever it takes, go do it. And she died 4 months before I got pregnant with my daughter. And so I wanted to connect them, and so I wrote Showa, and I'm going to end by reading that to you. Do I have time? That's the cover. I should show you the cover. And I'm not selling these books. I'm not trying to sell these books to you. They're not for sale out there. Please, my only plea is please use your public libraries. All of these books are in your public libraries. And I am so much more intentional about keeping our public libraries open than I am about making, a 10% royalty or whatever. So use those libraries, and you can find any of these books. And if ever there's a book, I know you all know this, but that's not in your library, your local library, you can have it requested through interlibrary loan. So you have a right to have the books you want in your local library. When Suni's great-grandma was 7, she was sold from the Virginia land to a plantation in South Carolina without her ma or pa, but with some muslin her ma had given her, and 2 needles she got from the big house, and thread dyed bright red with berries from the chokecherry tree. In South Carolina, Big Mama raised Suni's great-grandma, raised most of the slave children on that large patch of land. And that night, Big Mama told the children stories she'd tell in a whisper about children growing up and getting themselves free. And the children leaned in and listened real hard. And in the daytime, when there was some few minutes for a slave to rest a bit, Big Mama taught Suni's great-grandma to sew colored thread into stars and moons and roads. that slave children grew up and followed, late at night, a piece of the quilt, and the true moon leading them. Years passed. Big Mama moved on to the next world, and Suni's great grandma grew up, jumped room with a young man named Insla, had herself a baby girl, named that girl child Mathis May, and loved that baby up. So, yeah, she loved that baby up. And one day, Mathis May would be Suni's grandma, but not for a long, long time yet. In the meantime, she learned to sew. Beautiful girl child, learned to sew. When Mathis May was 7, she got sold away. Took a star from her mama's blanket, took a little piece of the road, held it to her heart when she wanted to feel back home, held it to her head to remember back home. Got herself some thread and some muslin and kept up her sewing. Sewed so fine she was making clothes for everyone in the big house, and slaves too. And at night she sewed stars and moons and roads, tiny patch pieces of stars and moons and roads. Slaves whispered what no one was allowed to say. That Mathis knows how to make a showway. Came to her when they needed to talk, came to her for the stories of brave people, came to her for the patch pieces just before they disappeared in the night. But Mathis May stayed on, grew tall and straight-boned, jumped room with another slave. That slave was killed running off to the north side of the war. Months before, he got to meet his baby, a girl child who was born free that same year, 1863. History went and lost her name, but years later, Suni came. Suni's mama held her up in the moonlit night, showed her the stars, the moon, whispered in her ear, "There's a road, girl. There's a road." Love that Suni up so, yeah, she loved that Suni up. Suni and her mama stayed on the land they'd always known, picking cotton for a little pay and a piece of that ground to farm. Called that land home. Stayed on with other people, none of them slaves anymore. Hard work making a life from pink day to blue black night, but it was a free life just the same. And when the day was finally over, it wasn't hard to find a thing or two to smile about. And at night they cut and sewed strange lines and odd designs. People said about Suni that child could find some beauty in so many things. When Suni was 7, she was tall and straight-boned like her mama, took and washed with her mama, sewed stars on patch pieces, sewed stars and moons and roads, sewed fields and rivers and trees, patched those pieces together for her mama to come sell come market day, called those quilts, trail to the north, called those quilts, showway. Didn't much need that secret trail anymore, but started living well off the money those quilts brought in. Sewed those quilts to live, sewed those quilts to remember. And though some could book read, most could not. Stars and moons and roads, picture reading was what they'd always known. Some morning, Suni looked out over the field and dreamed of a place to call her own. Married a man named Walter Scott, who owned a bit of land in Anderson, South Carolina, had herself a baby girl and named that girl child Georgiana. Loved that baby up, so yeah, she loved that baby up. Georgiana, who grew up tall and straight-boned and free, reading from her mama's Bible by age 3. I'm sorry. People say about Georgiana, she always had a book in her hand. Grew up to teach at a small school in Anderson, had herself 2 girls at once and named them Carlene and Ann. Loved those babies up. Yeah, she loved those babies up. And Carlene and Ann grew up tall and straight-boned, turned 7 walking in a line to change the laws that kept black people and white people living separate. They were a little scared sometime, but pinned inside their dresses were showway patches Grandma Suni had given them, and something about those patches made Scared hang his mean old head and walk away. Anne grew up writing poems, and sometimes she stitched those poems into songs. Sometimes she made those poems into songs. Carlene stitched those songs into art that people bought to hang on their walls. And Anne had me. And Mama loved this baby up, so yeah, she loved this baby up. And when I was 7, I didn't have to work in any fields or walk in any freedom lines, but I still read like Georgiana and wrote like Anne. And when the words were slow in coming, I sewed stars and moons and roads into quilts and curtains and clothes, because Mama said all that stuff that happened before me is my own kind of show way. There's a road, my mama said. There's a road. And I grew up tall and straight boned and free, and writing every day. And the words became books that told the stories of many people's showways. Had myself a baby girl and named that girl child Toshi Georgiana. Love that baby up. So, yeah, I love that baby up. But I know this life's a circle, a ring of folk who came before me, here again to tell their stories. Let that circle be unbroken. Let that circle be unbroken. So some mornings I start all over, holding tight to little Toshi. I whisper a story that came before her. Now Suni was your great-great-grandma, I say. And when Suni's grandma was 7? Thank you.